Welcome, everybody, to Indivisible Text Ledge Live. It is Saturday, April 24th. Happy to be with you. We are going to go through the super packed week that happened in the Texas legislature, the 87th Texas legislature, with a lot of it stemming from the House budget night that happened on Thursday, April 22nd. Joined, as always, is the amazing Twitter commander-in-chief, Jason Sugg. Jason, how are you doing this Saturday?
I'm good. Such a beautiful day out there.
Yeah, it's not too bad here Saturday where I'm at in Texas as well. I'm up north than you in the DFW area in Fort Worth. I don't know why I'm even giving Dallas any recognition. There's a Fort Worth Dallas rivalry. It's Fort Worth alone. But at the same time, Fort Worth has its own problems. Claiming it is problematic. But we've got a slew of tweets for everybody that we want to dive into. A lot of updates, a lot of activity, as we mentioned. So let's see what was going on this week.
Yeah, like Alex said, it's been a super packed week. I'm going to share my screen here. I think this is the right one. Yeah, so big week for a couple of reasons. There was quite a lot going on in terms of like national news and local news. And this week was featured budget night, which on Thursday, April 22nd, which was where the House was working to pass the state budget for the next couple of years. And it's a scene where a lot was going on there. And so I just wanted to highlight that we, as an organization, Alex, you were heavily involved in this, but we co-hosted a rally at the Capitol on Thursday to highlight some of the priorities that we wanted to see get addressed in budget night. I think we were there with Progress Texas and every Texan and some others as well. You could probably speak to that.
Yeah, a huge effort. It was a huge privilege for Indivisible Text Ledge to be a part of this. As you mentioned, Progress Texas, Planned Parenthood Texas Votes, Avow, Texas Freedom Network, Common Cause Texas, Tent, Texas for All, Workers Defense Action Fund, Our Revolution Texas, and Indivisible Text Ledge. Really all came together, and a lot of different pieces to this. Everyone chipped in, and a huge shout out to Progress Texas, especially for getting it out to the media. And so they were really instrumental in getting and helping moderate the press conference. And so their partnership was amazing. And so it was great to see Texans get out there. We had a couple of different speakers for the rally that started before the press conference actually kicked off. And so we were at the South Gate and we're able to rally some Texans around the message of Texas deserves better. And it's really all about, we've seen this horrible legislation, hateful legislation that negatively impacts so many different parts of our state and the people in it. And we really need Texas in our state legislature to pass legislation that's going to help us, like Medicaid expansion, getting those federal dollars for public education as two big things, the two biggest parts of the budget. But the coalition that came together was to really highlight how all of these attacks on these different communities within our state, how this is making it, unsafe. This is making it just the vitriol around it, against transgender community, against the labor community, against the immigration community, all different aspects of Texas that are being impacted with this horrible legislation, anti-abortion legislation. We really need to get past this so that we can actually solve these problems, because every Texan is feeling this pain. A great example was with Adrian from Public Citizen being there around the Texas Freeze event that happened during the legislative session. And we have not seen nearly enough work being done to resolve that. And so while they're attacking these different communities within Texas, we're seeing how their ineptitude, just their complete failure at leadership is truly affecting every single Texan in our state. And so we cannot afford to have that keep happening. And this legislative session is designed for us to be able to pass bills to improve that, and we're just not doing that. So we need everyone to call Speaker Phelan of the Texas House and really emphasize that this hateful legislation, this anti-voting rights legislation across the board needs to be halted, and we need to pass things to help Texans.
Yep, absolutely. If you check out this tweet, there's Progress Texas has a link to some of the coverage of it. You can take a look and see what was there, and maybe you might even want to like join up with us and help put together these kinds of things. We always need volunteers, so take a look, see what we're up to, and come join us.
Yeah, and you point that out, Jason. It was really interesting because this is really Indivisible Texas Leges. We had a drop off earlier in the ledge session around the January 6th sedition that happened at the Capitol, and we had a bunch of partners with asking for resignations for everyone who was a part of that, including indicted Attorney General Ken Paxton. But we have not been organizing in-person events nearly as much as we would love to because of the pandemic. But now that we're seeing a lot more of our own organizers get their vaccines and a lot more people in the communities are getting vaccines, this is opening up for an opportunity. So if you're interested, like Jason said, let us know. We want to make sure that Texans are getting made aware of the bad things happening at the ledge.
Yep, absolutely. So speaking of the winter storm, that's going to be our first topic today. The House passed a package of bills that were aimed at addressing some of these. Unfortunately, they mostly seem to be the kind of twiddling around the edges that we have come to expect from this deregulated marketplace. I don't think anywhere in here was the simple, if you're an energy provider in Texas, you have to weatherize your facilities, which is really what needs to be happening, right? But there were some reforms to ERCOT and other things that are probably all well and good, but don't actually seem to get to the core of the problem here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been disappointing to see the lack of progress that we've been able to make when I think Texas Tribune reported over 111 people have died that have been accounted for that died during this Texas freeze, a completely preventable disaster. And we've been partnering with Public Citizen and a coalition of organizations that are focused on the environment and energy around daily information, pieces of information that you can share with Texans in your community around the facts of the Texas freeze and around the solutions that can actually make a difference. And so check out that content and share it, because we need more and more people pushing for progress and solutions, because we're not out of the brink, which I think is where you're going to go next. We're not out of the danger zone.
Right. And we should say all that content that Alex just references on our Twitter feed. If you go there and look through, you'll find it. And I think we're continuing to post for the next week some stuff there. So, so this package of bills was passed, but we're also hearing warnings that it's possible that we could see more outages this summer if demand goes up, much like happened in the winter, except we'd all be without AC or whatever in the midst of summer. So this is starting to feel like a real third world issue here, that we can't even supply ourselves with enough electricity to keep us going during the hard times, and quite disappointing, I think.
Yeah, very disappointing, because there's solutions like, Texas not being on an electric grid on their own. We're connected to the other two major electric grids in the United States, that we could get that support, so that if we are feeling like we don't have enough power, then it can be addressed. And let's be honest, the Texas freeze was an event that is not common here in Texas, but we definitely know hot summers are very common here in Texas. And long hot summers.
Yep.
And so those air conditioners are going to be cranking in every space that they can. And if that ends up failing and we don't have that within our homes and within our businesses and everywhere else in our communities, people are really going to suffer.
Yes.
And once again, something completely preventable. And so
Yep.
the fact that this is on the horizon and that this is a concern and we're not doing every single thing we can to ensure it doesn't happen shows just the deficit in leadership we have with Governor Abbott at the helm. And really, Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick are two key figures that have to go. We no longer need them leading Texas because they are doing a horrendous job.
Yep. Right. Like Alex said, not even addressing the real problems. This is kind of a statewide thing with the Texas Republicans, especially right now. So I don't think it's just limited to them. But the numbers that we saw from the Texas freeze were really that, it was something like 50% of the natural gas facilities went offline that supplied the vast majority of energy to the state. And yet the focus in some circles in the legislature right now seems to remain on renewable energy sources, which are a fraction of Texas's energy supply. And really the emphasis needs to be on weatherizing all of these facilities, regardless of whether it's natural gas or renewables. And like Alex said, taking other measures like connecting ourselves to the national grid. And
this really puts us behind the times. Like we are going to be going backwards with this because renewable energy is a clear step in the right direction for our future and our ability to get energy throughout the state. And so not only are we not addressing that issue, like you said, we're actually making ourselves go backwards, which is unbelievable to think about.
Yeah. And really for not great reasons. We saw this week that the Texas Tribune did an analysis of political donations to Greg Abbott, and he's taken almost $27 million from the oil and gas industry in the last 2 decades of his political career. So we kind of see what's happening out there, right? This industry, which is a strong one in Texas, is actively pushing, they're using this crisis as an opportunity to really push their own agenda, which is going to strengthen their market position and make Texans less secure, though, by moving us away from other sources of energy that could keep going even when gas has problems.
Yeah. And this is where we've seen those corruption. It's just corruption and that we see within the state of Texas. We see it with Governor Abbott. We see it with Attorney General Ken Paxton. We see it with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. All three of these statewide leaders in Texas, cronyism and corruption is their go-to moves. And we really need to get rid of that in our state governance because we need competence and we need progress. And our infrastructure in so many spaces need investment, development, and those to actually be done, not just our electric grid, but we've seen, the risk of our electric grid being so faulty, what it does.
Yeah.
I do want to highlight, Jason, real quick. We have a viewer, Elva Mendoza, who left a note for us. Awesome Coalition is their one place that is compiling weekly calls to action from all of them in one place. And Elva, this is a great question. We appreciate your support. At this time, we don't have a consolidated space for all of the partners that we work with so that everybody can see them in one place. But this is definitely something we can bring up with our coalition. We have a big call with Texas organizations this week coming up. And so we've invited, over 250 leaders across Texas that we're inviting to this call to continue to talk about these projects and collaboration opportunities so we can improve the work that we're seeing across, the spectrum in the state so that we are able to work together. and making the progress that we have. So this idea, we'll be more than happy to bring it up to see if there's an opportunity for something like that.
Yeah, great question. So moving on, I wanted to, another issue that was up this week was Medicaid expansion in Texas. And I wanted to highlight our own Ash Hall, talking about the way that the Lege is attacking trans people rather than actually dealing with our uninsured rate here in Texas, which we should mention, we have the highest uninsured rate in the country right now, and we're leaving billions of dollars on the table in terms of Medicaid funds right now. So this is a huge issue for millions of Texans, and Texas deserves better.
Ash is such an amazing leader in Texas and has given amazing testimony throughout the legislative session at key committee hearings for various bills that are just straight up attacks on Texans, and especially attacks on trans kids. And so Ash's speech at the event focused on education and healthcare and how these are some of the bigger problems we need to solve that we can solve. But instead, and that could help so many Texans, including our trans kids in the state of Texas, but instead are taking the time to attack that community. And so huge shout out to Ash and all the speakers. We are truly blessed and grateful to be able to work alongside an amazing organizer and leader in Texas.
Absolutely. And so there was multiple fronts on this Medicaid expansion this week. On one front, during the Trump administration, Texas had applied for a special waiver, and this stuff gets so complicated. It's part of how it all flies under the radar. So Texas had applied for a special exception that allowed them to tap some Medicaid funds without actually doing the expansion. And of course, the Trump administration, who hated the ACA, granted it. And the Biden administration this past week declined to renew that waiver, which puts Texas on the hot seat to say, like, if you want these funds, then you have to expand Medicaid the right way, not through some backdoor way. And
yeah, and this agreement was always supposed to be temporary, but Texas is taking advantage of it. So what we're doing is we're saying, well, we'll act like we're going to expand Medicaid so that we can get extra federal dollars. We won't get everything to cover as many Texans as we could, but we will take some of this money because it doesn't require us to commit to pay for the full Medicaid expansion, which is the excuse Republicans are using not to expand Medicaid. Well, one thing I want to highlight is that we had a chance to interview Representative Donna Howard this week in preparation for budget night. In our budget night preview on Wednesday, we have that interview within that video. And Representative Howard shared, which many have shared now in Texas, that if Texas expands Medicaid, we actually make money. Yeah. The state will make money because of the amount of savings that will happen from having more insured Texans, because we have so many uninsured Texans. And one of the key things that Representative Howard pointed out was that because we're not expanding Medicaid and we have this agreement, the emphasis is on the counties and local property taxes to help pay for this versus the state. So we're actually causing property taxes to increase and putting the burden on property taxes versus getting those federal dollars that we submit with our income tax back, bringing it back to Texas to help pay for this.
Yeah.
And so we're paying income tax. It's going to the federal government. We're not getting any of that back in for this Medicaid expansion like we could. And instead we're putting more pressure on local property taxes to cover some of the elements of Medicaid within the state of Texas. And that just shows how Governor Abbott and this failed leadership that he has in Texas continues to cost Texans in so many different ways. We don't have the health care we should have, and then property taxes are being increased, and we're not getting the support that is available to us. The federal government's making it even easier this year. So this is the year to expand Medicaid.
Yep. And we should throw in that it also drives up insurance costs for non-Medicaid people, right? Because those people who would be on Medicaid are often pushed into the private marketplace and drive up costs for the insurance companies. So this is it's way past time for this to happen. There were a couple of attempts this week to work on this around budget day. Representative Coleman pushed an amendment that wasn't traditional Medicaid expansion. It uses a special waiver, but did try to expand the pool of people who would be eligible for those benefits. And of course, this was voted down, unfortunately, in the House. I believe he was at our rally.
Not Representative Coleman, but this was a huge effort that when we talked to legislators this week, we were hoping to see where this would go and that this had the potential because we are starting to see a little bit more support for Medicaid expansion. And so this was using the 1115 waiver approach, which Texas has had in the past, but using it to benefit more Texans so we can get on our way to Medicaid expansion. So yeah, this was a lot of work was put in this amendment from Representative Coleman, and Texans should be very grateful for the attempt that was made.
Absolutely. And there was also a bill by Julie Johnson, who was actually pushing proper Medicaid expansion. And she actually had a number of Republicans among the signers of this bill, who unfortunately, most of them didn't vote for it when it came to the floor, even though they had signed on beforehand. But there was at least some element of bipartisan support to work on this early on.
Yeah, so this is what made budget night so interesting that people were anticipating, was that Julie Johnson's bill now has a majority of House members signed on to support it. So would that majority support translate to support for Representative Coleman's budget amendment? And unfortunately it didn't. And so now the question is, well, can we get momentum on Representative Julie Johnson's bill so that Medicaid expansion can pass, fully and completely? And I think that'll be one of the key actions this week that we're going to ask people to partake in. We really need to see if we can get Medicaid expansion over the finish line. It was disappointing to see Representative Coleman's attempt not pass and not get more support. But if whatever happens, the things that happen on budget night, I think are going to be really critical for us as Texans to go ask these representatives after the Lege session of, why didn't you vote for this? And other amendments that they didn't vote for. Why are you not voting for investment in this space? This could help our community. Absolutely. And so the more we can ask questions to representatives tied to what they're voting on with the budget, the more they're going to realize we're really, really paying attention, and hopefully we can get better people in place.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we saw this kind of behavior that 8 of the 9 Republicans who had signed on to Julie Johnson's Medicaid bill were unwilling to support Representative Coleman's amendment, even ones that had campaigned on better coverage. And ultimately, this bill went down 68-80, I think, against largely partisan lines. I think Lyle Larson was the one who switched sides.
Yeah, and this is where we'll have to see what ends up happening with this legislation. We can feel it's so close. Like it almost feels like Medicaid expansion is getting close to that tipping point. And if we are able to get there, then the overwhelming momentum will push our leaders in our legislature to pass Medicaid expansion.
Yep.
And so we, the Texans, have to be the ones who are getting us to that tipping point.
Yeah. How to have people call and say that you demand this from them. Switching tracks a little bit, more big news that came out this week was that Governor Abbott has been sitting on $19 billion in education funds that have come from the federal government over the last couple of years. And all 13 Texas Democrats in the U.S. House of Representatives, not the Tex Lege, but the U.S. House, signed a letter this week demanding that he release those funds. And, Texas does like so many crazy maneuvers with these funds. I think it requires that we dedicate another $1 billion to education to unlock this 19 billion, which is one of the things. And that the money that we have gotten has gotten diverted into filling budget shortfalls rather than actually going to public education.
Yeah, and this is where we see the federal level of government and the state level of government kind of overlapping in terms of, they're impacting each other. And it would be great to see even more action from our U.S. Congress men and women putting pressure on our state legislature.
Absolutely.
So that they do the right thing. And you're right, Jason, the extra $1 billion is for higher education. And the worry is that Texas is going to be on the hook to have to sustain that extra $1 billion for higher education moving forward. And do we want to commit to that investment? And the answer to that is yes. Yes, let's commit $1 billion more to higher education because we have real gaps and we have real shortfalls in terms of higher education in Texas. And if we want Texas to have the workforce and the opportunities to be able to, for every Texan in the state, then higher education is one of those outlets that really helps a lot of people get there.
Yep.
So the concern that there's always this balking at the state spending money because we, as a state, are very cheap when it comes to how much tax dollars we pay per citizen, per Texan here. And so we don't collect a lot of revenue, something that Eva from Every Texan highlighted in our budget night preview. And so that mentality is really crippling us and why we're seeing our infrastructure just start to crumble in all of these different spaces. Mm-hmm. And at the time of a pandemic, at the time of a Texas freeze event, if the house starts getting on fire, you don't question the price of water. You get the water you need
exactly
to take out the fire. And so we need to really resolve these issues. And so kudos to our U.S. House of Representatives that signed this letter to put pressure. We actually need to see more of that.
Absolutely.
But we as Texans can put that pressure on too. And so there was some good things that happened on budget night and related to this, though.
Yeah, I agree. We saw in the voter suppression bill stuff, some U.S. representatives on the Republican side showing up to give testimony at the state level, and it'd be nice to see that level of involvement from our from the people on the Democratic side as well. On a better note around this, there was movement on this in the Texas House. There was a budget amendment adopted that was going to push Abbott to get these funds and release them. You might know more about the details of this, Alex, than I do. But my understanding is that this was going to require him to make movement on that.
Yeah, so the frustration is that the legislature has not been a part of the process up to this point, really. Not nearly as much as they should be. Based on just the governance of our state. And so with the CARES Act passed in 2020, Governor Abbott really had the decision-making with those funds. And we saw poor decisions like the federal CARES Act funds going to public education, but then the state using it as an excuse to reduce state funds to public education so that for your local school district, it ended up being a net zero effect. And the ones who benefit was the state saved on the expenditures they had versus the local school districts getting extra money to pay for all the things they needed to pay. And so if Abbott's willing to do that in the height of the pandemic, what is he going to do with that money afterwards if he has tens of billions of dollars at his disposal. And so this was an effort that was successful to ensure that the federal funds intended for public education must go to public education. And so we are going to need more action to ensure that it stays in the budget during conference committee and that it gets signed by the governor once it gets to his desk. And so a couple of extra actions are going to be key in making this happen. But if we're successful with this, then that $19 billion is going to go to public education where it is desperately needed.
Yeah, I mean, $19 billion would be a huge infusion for us. Switching topics again, we had some movement this week on the attacks on trans kids that are going on. And just to make clear the kinds of craziness that we're seeing around this, Representative Lynn Stuckey, who was one of the people who were sponsoring bills or filing bills around this, like her bill was going to treat healthcare for trans kids as child abuse. If you were to be a medical or mental health professional and you used gender affirming language for these kids who want to identify as their non-biological sex, then that was going to be considered child abuse, and which is really a horrific thing. And it's hard to get over, for me, the cruelty of this move, and the lack of understanding of what is really going on. And
yeah, this is just, full-fledged ignorance on display here, right? Because this is completely losing sight of the humanity of a person.
Yep.
And simply using political points and tactics to benefit the individual, the representative who is pushing for this horrible bill, instead of trying to do things that are going to help Texans. And there was so much testimony around the anti-trans bills throughout this legislation that it takes a tough person to hear that testimony and to flatly say, I don't care.
Yeah.
Your voice doesn't matter. I'm going to keep pushing for this kind of legislation.
Yeah.
We can do better. And this goes back to our rally. Texas deserves better.
Texas
This
deserves.
all comes down to who we elect. And we really need to be mindful of the legislators that are doing this kind of hateful, horrific legislation so that they're no longer a part of the process.
Yep. And one of the avenues for attack is the outright bill, like Lynn Stuckey filed. Another has been budget amendments that are seeking to penalize various people who would speak out against these kinds of laws. So this amendment, for example, if you read it, was going to keep any businesses from receiving state funds, and of course, state contracts are quite a lot of business for some companies. And if they push back at all or criticize the state's laws, then they were going to be denied those kinds of state funds, which is really kind of an intimidation thing, right? And shows how I think subtle and how this stuff can get slipped in the back door.
Yeah, and I think that's key for Texans to continue to understand. And one of the things we are, as an organization, going to continue to work on alongside so many partners and allies is the work to help educate Texans on the things that we need to keep an eye on. Because it's not just the front door where legislation is filed, it goes to a committee hearing, gets public testimony and goes through that process. It's the budget process that is a huge area that we need to keep an eye on. And then it's also looking at amendments that are filed when bills are voted on the House floor or Senate floor, and all of a sudden you think a bill that was dead, some of the key language gets attached as an amendment to another bill. And so there's all these different tactics that are used to get some of this, hurtful legislation put on the books through these different means. And so it's just, we have to be vigilant. And once again, we have to be vigilant because of the type of people we've elected. And so one way to make it easier for all of us is to elect people who are public servants who truly want to do the work to help Texas have progress and have a better and brighter future. And so it's on us to really elect better people. And we have a lot of hurdles in front of us because of gerrymandering, because of voter suppression, but we have to overcome those obstacles. There's no other way. We need to overcome these obstacles. We need help from the federal government to pass a voting rights law and everything, but we've got to be the ones who are ready to step up to the plate.
Yep. And speaking of good legislators, thanks to Erin Weiner for killing this amendment. She's from Hayes County, like San Marcos area, and she's wonderful and managed to get this one knocked out. So thank you, Erin.
It couldn't be a better example of what a good legislator can do.
Exactly. Yep.
This is exactly why we need more like Erin Weiner.
Exactly. And the good news about this is the transgender sports bill, which was quite invasive, right? It would allow anybody to challenge the gender of a child playing on a sports team, and then that child would have to prove their biological sex to some monitors. I have kids. I would not want anybody being able to like demand that my children's genitalia be inspected in order to prove that they belonged on this team. I mean, how invasive is that? But the good news is seems like it's going to be dying in committee, even though it made it out of committee, but it's going to die in the scheduling committee.
Yeah, you're right. This is good news. Representative Dutton, as the House Public Education Committee Chair, has been kind of a mixed bag about various aspects. He's very pro charter school, which we are not. And there was concerns about his support for a bill like this, how far he would let it go in the process. So this is good news. We want to make sure that it truly is killed and it doesn't pop up in any other way. Right. But yeah, to your point, Jason, it's just the thinking about the enabling and empowering of people who are hurtful and hateful in our communities. Why would we want to do anything to empower them to where they can point at any kid? And you and I both have kids, have probably been to our fair share of sporting events for kids. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of parents there that are already not nice.
Yep.
Because they're putting so much value on their kids' participation in these sports, being the pathway for a better life in some way. And so I've seen 5-year-old soccer games where it's the World Cup. And so to enable that kind of toxicity, to be able to then say, I don't trust that kid's gender, that they should be on this team, and trying to intimidate kids in that way, we should not be enabling that kind of activity in our communities. And it would be so hurtful to those kids and those families. And so this is good news.
Yep. Just a quick voter suppression update. There hasn't been a lot of movement on these bills this week, but they're still there. So League of Women Voters has had a nice action here. We also have actions. If you go to our website and look at our calls to action, there are calls to action on both SB 7 and HB 6 there, as well as some other bills around redistricting and whatnot. But they had a nice action that I wanted to highlight just to keep it in everybody's mind, because it's still there.
Absolutely. HB 6, SB 7 is something we must stop. And League of Women Voters in Texas are an amazing organization doing awesome work around not only this kind of legislation, but redistricting.
Mhm.
and somebody we look to for a lot of great insight and partnership with in mobilizing Texans to take action. So be on the lookout. We'll probably have some updates around SB7, HB6 this week or the coming weeks. And so definitely, if you haven't taken action, take action. If you already took action and made calls, take action again. We need to keep the constant voice of opposition for these bills going.
Yep. If you have questions about them, I thought this was a nice highlighting of the changes that are going to be pushed under SB7 from Alexa or at Texas Tribune. And it just goes on to some of the things that are going to be different, which I mean, really, it's quite invasive, some of the changes where they're letting anybody come into a polling place and film what's happening there. There's a lot more leeway for poll watchers to challenge people's eligibility to vote. And it's just it's creating barriers to entry. I mean, I wouldn't want to walk into a polling place and have the idea that somebody was going to like challenge my right to be there and that I was going to have to produce.
Yeah, and that's a direct attack on democracy. I mean, that's intimidation. That's making it a toxic environment. And poll watching is a partisan activity. And so
absolutely,
based on the political party that you support. And so whether you're Republican or Democrat, we don't want to see anybody trying to intimidate any voter in Texas. And we should not be making it open for people to test the bounds of that intimidation that they can do. We need a healthy democracy where every Texan can vote, which is over 20 million eligible Texans in our state. Only 11.3 voted in 2020, which was the highest number of votes we've ever recorded in an election. So we've got a lot of work to do to help more Texans vote during elections through every election. There's a local election that's going on May 1st. And so this kind of stuff is just to discourage voting. Don't let it work. Don't let it happen to you and your community. We must push back on this legislation, and we must be active around elections so that people are getting out there to vote.
Yep. Oh, yes. And here's an action from us on this. You can call Representative Dustin Burrows, who's the chair of the Calendars Committee, and tell him not to let these bills get to the floor. Like right now, they're in the scheduling committee, which is the one that actually lays out when the whole floor is going to have votes on particular bills. And so these are there. They haven't been scheduled yet. This is an opportunity to stop them.
Yeah, every step of the process that we can put pressure on to stop it, we must do.
Yep.
So this is a great action from the Texas Organizing Project and from Progress Texas. Let's jump on this action and let's get this stopped.
Yep. Another big story going on in Texas right now is that we're having an all-out assault on abortion rights. This was Planned Parenthood was highlighting a pretty comprehensive tweet from Wendy Davis about the various bills and what they do. These HB 1515 would ban abortion from 6 weeks on, and this is maybe like as concerning. Creates a private cause of action against anyone who helps someone get an abortion. So that means that any citizen out there who wants to accuse somebody else of helping to get an abortion can do it, and then it has to go in and be investigated and whatnot. And this also means that anybody who is pregnant and has a miscarriage could immediately be under suspicion. I mean, it's such an invasive bill, and also has all the terrible consequences of not having access to abortion.
Yeah, I think Wendy Davis's point here of HB 1515 bans abortion at 6 weeks before most women even know they're pregnant.
Yeah.
Is one of the absurd elements of the structure of this bill. And to your point, it's, a lot of reproductive rights advocates in our state are really worried that, abortion is going to be all essentially illegal in our state
Yep.
By September. And do we have the support from the Supreme Court when those challenges are challenged in court to overturn them? And a lot of people are concerned that we don't, because of the way the makeup of the Supreme Court right now. And so Texas is being used as a testing ground to see how they can eliminate abortion in the United States. And so we really have an obligation to push back as much as we can. We must stop this kind of horrible legislation from passing.
Yep. Yeah, this would be probably the most restrictive abortion ban in the country at this point. And so we have an opportunity to really stand up here and stop it. This was another action from Progress Texas on, there's actually a number of these bills that are attacking abortion in various ways. They have a whole list of them here to take action on from our partner Progress Texas. So I would encourage you to take a look at that and give Dustin Burrows and Dave Phelan a call.
Yep. Absolutely. And we've been tracking this legislation. Check out our CTAs for that information as well. We're going to be packaging a couple of key legislative CTAs here for this next week because we want to, there's a lot of work being done with the calendars committee. We want to go directly to Speaker Phelan, House Speaker Phelan, to put the pressure on him to stop this legislation from moving forward.
Yep.
So be on the lookouts for our CTAs coming soon.
Yep. And I think, he came in with such a moderate face, and he's allowed lots of very not moderate things to happen under his watch. And so it's time for us to really be applying some pressure to him.
Yeah. We need to see him actually, letting these breathe and have the space to breathe as much as they have has been concerning. He's still the Speaker of the House. He can still be a big part of stopping this.
Yep.
And preventing this from moving forward. So we really need to see that happen because he's not the speaker that a lot of people like Representative Collier was speaking on the behalf of at his nomination in terms of being balanced and moderate if he lets this legislation get through.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, here also another action from Planned Parenthood Texas on stopping HB 1515. Excuse me. One last thread here. Another big movement this session has been for permitless carry, meaning that anybody could carry a gun without having to have a permit or any kind of background check or qualification. And this has been opposed by all kinds of groups because do we really want lots of people, any random Yahoo walking around with a gun on the street, concealed or not? And this passed the House this past week. And fortunately at this point, it does not have the votes in the Senate. And Dan Patrick has kind of tabled it there. And there's a real rift going on in the Texas GOP right now, where Alan West and the Texas GOP chair and some members of that organization are really on the attack against Dan Patrick about this. So he's getting lots of pressure to make this happen. And his solution seems to have been to appoint a special committee on constitutional issues, including permitless carry, which somehow gets classed as a constitutional issue in the gun rights mind, I guess.
Yeah, this is very concerning, the special committee, because we haven't really heard directly from Governor Abbott about this. And so it's concerning that, this Patrick is doing this in the Senate. Are they truly supporters of this to pass? Do they truly want anybody in Texas to carry a gun because they're a Texan? That seems very dangerous. We've already had shootings happening in Texas here in this last month.
Yep.
And we need to do everything we can to try to prevent those things from happening. Not having any restrictions on people to be carrying guns, especially people who shouldn't be, seems like the wrong direction for us to go.
Yeah.
And I always find it interesting when people make these constitutional arguments, because it's like the Constitution is there, but there's also all these amendments we've passed to modify the Constitution.
Yeah.
And so when they say the Second Amendment, and everything, it's like, this is not the only round of interpretation that we have with our Constitution for our country and everything like that. This is a living document. And so having reasonable background checks, universal background checks for us to all have safety. I mean,
yep.
They have all these regulations around voting.
Yeah, right.
Trying to suppress the vote, and they want 0 for carrying a gun.
Yep.
Those seem to be on two different sides of the spectrum there that we need to have better solutions around.
Yeah. And of course, Dan Patrick is a pretty savvy political operator. And I have to think he's been watching the horror show of the last couple of weeks nationwide with the shootings in Indianapolis and elsewhere, and thinking that this might not be the time for this particular kind of action. So he could be shuffling it off to die in committee, and this could be a way of throwing a bone to the far right wing of the Texas GOP, or this could be a way of keeping it under the radar until people have forgotten and passing it this session. So we're just going to have to keep our eyes on it. And again, we'll need all of you, to be ready to make calls about this if it shows signs of life again.
Absolutely.
On a more fun note, one of our favorite representatives, James Tallarico, on 4/20 Tuesday filed a cannabis legalization bill. I think this is a great idea. Let's end this crazy war on drugs that we've got going that fills our prisons and whatnot. And so shout out to Representative Tallarico, and thank you to him.
Yes, Representative Tallarico definitely is an amazing legislature. I think on budget night, he bought every office of the House some donuts from a local donut shop in Round Rock. And we kind of joke that it's to sweeten the deal, to lower the defenses. And so that's the kind of stuff you love to see from your representatives, passing good legislation, being a good colleague. And Representative Tallarico continues to show a model of how to be a Texas legislator that is truly a public servant.
Yeah. And we should also mention that he's the youngest legislator in the Texas Lege, I believe, at this point. So hopefully he is the future of this institution.
Amen to that, Jason. Hopefully this is an indication of what legislators are going to look like moving forward. And so setting the model up in a perfect and great way, supporting education as a former teacher. That's what we want to see from our legislators.
Yep, absolutely. And last note, I just wanted to give a little bit of credit to the Republicans in the Senate. There was this bill up where, there's a whole list of Texas place names that still feature Negro in them. And there was a bill to go and change these and kind of move on from that part of our past that was opposed actually by the Texas GOP party. But every Senate Republican voted in favor of this. So good for them for helping this effort to move past that era of our history and put this in the past where it belongs.
Yeah, it's something that should be a no-brainer and easy. But as it says, despite opposition from state GOP,
Yeah.
and they themselves having to clarify that, they're the Republican Party, not the ridiculous party. And it's hard to tell the difference, to be
It
honest.
is.
There are so many toxic Republican legislators in our state legislature that it really does a disservice to the Republican legislators who are there trying to do good work
Yep.
and trying to help support public education. Those 9 legislators that signed on for Medicaid expansion. This is the kind of bipartisan support we need in Texas. And so these extreme political operatives who only want division is not what we need in Texas.
Yep. Well, Alex, that's all I've got today.
Well, there was some breaking news that I want to share that was shared a little bit earlier today around another representative that has done good work for public education, signed on to the Medicaid expansion. That was Representative Huberty. Unfortunately, was arrested for a DWI last night. And so it is very unfortunate to see a legislator who tries to do good work have that kind of mistake and situation happen at the time where we need good legislators in the state legislature. And so we'll be keeping an eye on the fallout from that. Would he have been a part of the conference committee? Potentially. Is there still a chance for him? We don't know now with this kind of, arrest and thing that happened to him last night. And so, and with his district, he is a Republican in a space that has a large amount of Tea Party conservatives. And so if he ends up stepping away from the legislature because of this, does this leave it open for a very, very bad legislator to step in? And so something we'll keep an eye out, because those kind of things have ripple effects, and we'll see what the fallout ends up happening. But we put in our comments link to our calls to action website. Make sure and visit that. That's our collection. Elva had a question earlier about the coalition. And as we mentioned, we don't have a coalition-wide collection of CTAs, but we definitely have a collection of indivisible text Lege CTAs. And so you can go to our website, calls to action, and see all of the calls to action we're asking Texans to partake in. And there's a link to our CTA tracker there as well. So if you want to let us know you did an action, fill it out. And that way we can kind of see where Texans are engaging, and we can continue to see how we can get more and more mobilization. And so we would love your feedback. Let us know you've taken action. And that's the big key. We've got a couple of intense weeks coming up. We need everyone to be ready. We need every action that we can take to be completed so that we can stop this bad legislation and hopefully get some good legislation moving forward.
Yep, we've got about a month more of the regular session to go, don't we? And then this will be a little quieter for a little while.
Yeah. And then we see what work needs to be done in between.
Yes.
All right, Jason, great seeing you this Saturday. Thanks everybody for joining us. Stay plugged in. We'll talk to you